I've been making haQ content for over 10 years, and in all of that time, there is a whole group of apps that I've kind of stayed away from. Yeah, if you go back through my content and check, you won't see me feature apps like this, or this, and it's not that often I even mention them. Well, there are two main reasons. But before I get into that, I really want to make sure that you understand that it's not that I'm hating on a whole group of apps because I think they're bad in some way. No, it's quite the opposite. I do think that they're good. And there are three main things I think that they're really good at. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, since this video is about using samples for making sounds with, I thought it would be a good idea if I actually did that. So I now have a new preset pack over at my Gumroad. It is for Tardigrain, and after watching this entire video, you'll realize, first of all, why I made the pack, but secondly, why I chose Tardigrain for making this pack. You'll find the link to my Gumroad store down in the description. And of course, paying patrons do not have to pay extra for these. You just download them from the Patreon page. Oh, and by the way, hello my beautiful viewers. Welcome to haQ. My name is Jakob. I'm your host and you're watching a haQ episode. Now, the group of apps I'm talking about are ROMplers, and ROMplers are sample players. And very often, these sample playing instruments are using multiple samples to reproduce a piece of hardware or something else. And here there are three things that the ROMpler really excels at. Number one, emulating really old, hard to get, no longer produced equipment. Take a mellotron.
And the sounds it has are flute, violin.
This is not something that is sold in music stores anymore. These things are also getting really old. What, 50, 60, 70 years old? They're breaking down. They're playing tape, and tape doesn't stay at a high quality for that long. And not only that, if you get one, it might be broken. Very often it is broken, and then you need repair manuals, you need technical skills and know-hows in order to get them working. It's hard to find the parts, and when you do, you need to tune it. It is not easy keeping a mellotron as a pet in your studio. And this is a great case for a ROMpler based mellotron instrument. Now you get to enjoy it at home because someone has already gone out there, found a functional, working, good sounding mellotron and sampled every key for you. And not only that, one thing to highlight here is that if they're sampling a particular mellotron, a mellotron that was used on a bunch of different recordings you've listened to by bands and groups that you love, then you will recognize that sound. All of those peculiar little quirks and things that went into that particular mellotron will be captured in those samples. It's a great case for a ROMpler-based instrument. Another great case is when you want instruments in your studio that just won't sound right if you don't know how to play them, like a cello or a violin. So, If you have a ROMpler-based violin, for instance, it will always sound like a violin when you're striking the keys. Now, a third good case for getting a ROMpler-based instrument is when you want an exotic instrument that can be either hard to get your hands on or it might be very, very expensive. And for this example, I'm going to take the pan drum, an instrument that has such a unique character to it, you'll recognize it instantly. I love this instrument. It is so cool. But back in the day, if you wanted one, you had to sign yourself up on a waiting list because there was only one manufacturer in the entire world. And when you got to buy one, you needed a lot of money. Now, you need less money today and you don't have to put your name on a waiting list because there are more manufacturers today making them. So after saving a lot of money for a very long time, my partner bought one because she's always wanted one and she still had to pay a couple of $1,000s. And if you want one, you need at least a couple of $1,000s or even more, depending on how big you want it to be, how long tone you want in it. I mean, you basically have to be a blacksmith and someone really good at tuning in order to make these things. So yeah, she had to save for a long time, and now that she has it, she has to learn how to play it. She has to get comfortable learning polyrhythms, because that's what make a pan drum sound the way it does when you're playing polyrhythms on them. And you cannot strike a pan drum the same way you're striking other drums, because if you strike it too hard, you're gonna deform it, and that's gonna detune it. And if you do that, well, you need that blacksmith to come to your home and tune it again, and that can be very expensive. And so getting a ROMpler-based pan drum would be way easier, cheaper, and again, you don't have to learn how to play it. It's gonna sound right whenever you're striking the keys on your keyboard, playing an instrument like that. So if you don't have any skills of playing certain instruments, if you don't have the money, if you don't want to service your equipment, ROMpler-based instruments are amazing. So there are two main reasons to why I don't want to use ROMpler-based apps. Number one is storage. 10 years ago, when I started using iDevices, I realized very quickly that I was going to have to limit the scope of my projects. You see, if you go back to that first year, I was producing videos for haQ on my channel. You'll see that a lot of my videos were just barely 10 minutes long. Often they were 5 minutes long, 7 minutes long, because I needed to make sure I had enough space in order to actually export the video when I was done editing it. You see, if the final video was supposed to be about 3 GB big, then I needed about 6 GB in order to export it. And there were times where I couldn't export the video, and the software would give me an error because there wasn't enough space, even though I knew there was enough space. And after doing some troubleshooting, I realized that hey, Apple had downloaded the latest version of iOS, and that's why there wasn't enough space. So I had to go and delete it, and now I could export my video. Now, the reason for all of this fussing about was because I was using an iDevice with only 16 GB of storage. I was using an iPhone. Yeah, I was producing everything on my iPhone. And back then, my days usually started with me deleting everything I did the day before. And if I had something I wanted to save, it wasn't that easy. The best option I found was using a network drive and then an FTP program, because trying to connect your stuff to iTunes that didn't even give you full access to the filing system was awful, and there was no easy way to connect external storage because you needed it to be MFI certified, you needed it to be working properly with Lightning and all of that stuff. So usually if you bought some form of storage, it was overpriced and it didn't give you that much more storage to work with. So getting ROMpler apps back then was just a no-go because they need a lot of storage, and not only that, they need a lot of RAM. Even when I was using a bigger iPad, which I got later on with 32 gigabytes of storage and 2 gigabytes of RAM, I still felt like I didn't have enough because these ROMpler apps need so much more when you work with them. And if you want to make use of multiple in a project, it's just too much. So very often I started relying on apps that was using physical modeling in order to produce sounds that sounded like some sort of hardware device. If I wanted to use organs, I would use something from Yonak because he makes some of the best organ apps out there. It's using synthesizers, not samples, to actually produce the sound. And it sounds very, very, very good. Now, if I wanted electric pianos, I could grab something like Tines. And so, yeah, physical modeling is great because it's using synthesis. And synthesis patches only need a few kilobytes for storage. And here we get to the second reason to why I stay away from ROMpler apps. Because I love synthesizers. I love having access to oscillators. I love doing phase modulation, cross modulation, wave shaping, ring modulation, you know, all of that stuff. I love having access to all of the parameters in my sound generating machine. Very often, ROMpler apps aren't really catered towards people who are into sound design and synthesis because they're usually made in a way where they're supposed to reproduce something already existing. And so there's a lot of focus being put into the material you're recording and the way you're recording it, what mics you're using, and all of that work has been done by the person trying to capture the character of that thing they then want to make a patch out of, a ROMpler patch out of. And very often you don't get full access to synthesizer controls. You might get access to some effects, maybe a filter or two, which is synth controls, and then maybe some envelope parameters, but it's not like you're actually dealing with a synthesizer. Now, if you're starting to think that maybe this guy isn't using any samples at all, then let me stop you there because I do. It's just that I tend to use samples with a particular type of app. And here I get to say two magical words: granular synthesis. It's a beautiful form of synthesis because here you're mixing the best of two worlds, sampling and synthesis. And you're doing it by grabbing small bits and pieces of a sample to make something big. And you don't need a lot of storage because your samples can be very short. And with just one sample, you can make 100 patches if you just move around the sampling point. Whenever I'm talking about granular synthesis, I'm thinking about two methods. Number one is proper granular synthesis, and this is when you're sampling milliseconds per granulate from the material. Now, if you want to go into making pads, atmospheric sounds, and leads, then I would suggest you go into the hundreds of milliseconds or longer. So you're basically going into microsampling territory. So each granulate is sampling way more than just a few milliseconds. And what I like so much about being able to choose how I'm sampling from the source material is that I can use the same source material multiple times. Check this out. See how easily we're getting different types of patches out of the same material? This is what I love so much about granular synthesis. But there is a little issue here because white noise might not be the most optimal type of material to sample from, at least not when I'm showing you how varied you can get with granular synthesis. No, for that we need to switch out to another material. By mixing the two different types of sampling and also moving our sampling point around, we can get even more patches out of the same material. Now, another good efficient thing about granular synthesis is that you don't need any 32-bit float 96 kilohertz samples. No, your samples can be of a lower quality, so you're saving space there too. Yeah, while being creative, you can also be efficient. And resampling is your best friend. You see, not only for efficiency, but for interesting sounds. If you've taken a sample and you've put it into your synth and now you've granularized it, whatever comes out of the synth, you just record, chop up, and throw right back into it again. So the question is, out of all of my most favorite granular synthesizer apps, why did I choose Tardigrain? Well, some of you might have seen the video in where I talked about touchscreen instruments and why I like them so much. And that is what Tardigrain is. It was made by Erik Siegt, a guy who really cares about the iOS platform and making sure that his apps have big controls that are filling out the screen. It looks interesting, a bit esoteric, which can be hard to read, but once you get into it, they're so easy to use. Big controls feels great with touch. Now, the second reason is that Tardigrain was designed by Erik to be a keyboard app, and basically it will retune and repitch the source material to follow a pitch standard over the keyboard. So it's easy to make melodic stuff with Tardigrain, no matter what you're throwing into it. Even noise becomes melodic with Tardigrain. And on top of that, when you want to play it on a touchscreen, because it's a touchscreen instrument and works really well for that, well, you have more parameters that you can control with sliding movements. And you can see these lines move around inside the keys when I'm playing it. And the system is well built because it's very easy to add controls here. You just simply open this up, turn this on, and now you're controlling the attaQ with the slider. You can even switch it out to do something else. And so in the end, what you have is an app that is great for touch, plus it also gives you a way of building expressive patches which follows a pitch standard. A very, very nice performance app indeed. The third reason I chose Tardigrain goes back to the micro sampling versus granular sampling synthesis thing that I talked about earlier. You see, the engine can mix both of them together. So if we set it all the way up here, then the samples get longer and longer the further up it gets. And the further and further down it gets, it samples shorter samples. And it will switch between these and move between these, making it very, very interesting sounding. Now, you can select to just have it sample one way, like this. And on top of that, you can modulate this behavior. You can have it with an LFO move between granular sampling and microsampling. And you can also control this behavior with the keyboard, and it's so easy to set up. Now, everything you see in the upper part of the screen can be modulated. So you can modulate the envelope, the granular engine, you can modulate the playback position or the sampling position. You can also modulate the effects. And when it comes to the effects, you've got a reverb, you got a wave shaper, you've also got some stereo panning and some other stuff. So there is a lot in here, even though there isn't that much. It's actually just the right amount of stuff in here. Now, if we press here, we have the filter section with 3 modes. High pass, low pass, and band pass, and this can also be controlled by keyboard. We also have a setup page for setting up everything we want to do with the keyboard, and we have up to 4 controls that we can tie to the keyboard sliders. There are some more options in here for MPE and other stuff, but there is also an arpeggiator in here, and then down here we can find the LFO. Now here we get to my biggest bit of criticism when it comes to Tardigrain. The LFOs are limited. You only have 2 waveform modes for the LFOs. You can either use a triangular waveform or a random generator. And I wish there were more waveforms. Sine wave, square, ramp up, ramp down saw. And then for the random, I wish there was a second random more smoothed out or filtered. Now, I do have some absolute favorite ROMplers of mine, and two of those are the Sampletron from IK Multimedia and also the Korg Module collection. Those are my real favorite ones, and there's so much in there, so many instruments, so many sounds, and there's of course a lot of in-app purchases, but they're all worth it. However, I constantly uninstall these just to get some more space, because yes, I am still struggling with space. My videos are longer now, which I've always wanted to make, and they're also at a higher resolution, 4K, which means I need more storage. So the 512 gigabytes, which can be a lot if you're doing just synth patches, is not a lot because I'm doing videos also. So I constantly uninstall the bigger apps, and Sampletron and Korg Module are two of them. But they're still my favorite, so I still install them as soon as I have the space again. But there is this one app that I do not uninstall, and that's VHS Synth. Now, the reason for me not uninstalling it is because of nostalgia. This thing really caters to me because it carries an overall sound that just speaks to people who grew up during the 80s, like myself. I was born in '79, and believe it or not, but I have actually worked with reel-to-reel recorders, even though that's an even older format. So tape is my thing. I love that stuff. Now, VHS Synth is an audio kit synth. However, the sounds were recorded by Brian Funk. And if you want to know more about it, I suggest you go and watch my VHS Synth video that I made, because I'm also interviewing Brian Funk in that video. Now, what he did for VHS Synth was he picked out certain synths from his synth collection, and then he recorded them and processed the sounds through a VCR. And that's a great case for a ROMpler. Not everybody has a VCR or a VHS player at home anymore, right? And even if you do, it might not be functional. And even if you find one online, you might need to repair it, you might need to restore it. It is a great case for a ROMpler when you want to capture a specific sound character or something and make an instrument out of it so that more people can use that sound. Where was I going with that? Oh, VHS Synth is one app that I refuse to uninstall when I'm deleting everything else when I need space because of nostalgia, and I need to go back and listen to the sounds in this thing. I just love it so much. It's great. Now, I have more favorite ROMplers, but I just don't keep them installed because it's just taking up too much space. Yeah, and that space thing, you know, that space thing is it's a pretty big thing for me. So I probably won't start using a lot of ROMplers anytime soon. But I will continue using Granular synthesizers, and I hope that you start using them too if you're not using them right now. You're getting the best out of two worlds. You get to do synthesis, and you also get to do all that weird stuff you can do with samples. Now, if you are interested in getting Tardigrain, then I'll put a link to it down below, and also a link to my Gumroad page where you can go and buy my preset pack. So, to round this off, I want to say thank you so much for watching. You might need a doctor, and I love you so much. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you for all of your support on Patreon, and thank you for pressing the thumbs up right now. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.